I think that's a very powerful idea, that Liquid was built with assets in mind. It's kind of baked in. A lot of ideas can kind of go into Liquid first. So SegWit, is a famous example. We can kind of design it and then implement it in Liquid and show kind of the world that, hey, this model works, right? I would say Liquid is still very much its own thing, but because it's so similar to Bitcoin, when a new feature is introduced to Liquid, it definitely should raise some excitement for the possibilities for Bitcoin. What we call a native asset on Liquid is the standard asset, but there's also things called issue-attract assets and transfer-restricted assets, and those are built on something called AMP. One thing that I've heard from people is that because Liquid has this extended script, we can create things like liquidity pools and decentralized exchanges. Because Liquid works on Lightning, I think that is also a huge draw to come and build on Liquid as well.
Randy Naar is a software engineer at Blockstream focused on bringing assets to the Liquid sidechain. In our discussion, we covered exactly what Liquid is, we discussed how it works and what sets it apart from other L2 scaling solutions such as the Lightning Network. We also discussed what asset issuers are using Liquid for today and the potential future applications that asset issuers might want Liquid for in the future. Randy has also asked to have his share of today's SAT splits sent to the Human Rights Foundation. So if you enjoy this show and if you learn something new, the best way you can support the show and the Human Rights Foundation is by sending in sats over the Lightning Network in response to the value you got out of this show. If you thought this show was great, send a lot of sats. If you didn't, send a few. Just a quick note before we get into today's show. This episode is sponsored by Voltage. Voltage is the industry standard and next generation provider of Lightning Network infrastructure. This episode is also sponsored by Zebedee, and Zebedee is your portal into the world of Bitcoin gaming. We'll have more from Voltage and Zebedee later in the show. Randy, welcome to the show, and I'm so excited to chat with you about Liquid because it's a layer 2 scaling technology that I know exists. I know it's different from Lightning. It's got its own feature set. It's got different trade-offs, but I don't know enough about it. And I want to learn more. And I want to learn how it interacts with Bitcoin, if it interacts with Lightning at all, and I've got a ton of questions for you. But before we get into it, maybe we can start off with your background in Bitcoin. I'd love to know more about how you first discovered Bitcoin, why you decided to then put all your energy and time into building on Liquid.
Yeah, so how I first found out about Bitcoin was in 2014. I had a cousin who kind of went all in on Bitcoin, and he was researching all these different cryptocurrencies like Ethereum and whatnot. But he told me Bitcoin's the best. But the thing is he didn't understand all of the technicalities of Bitcoin, but he understood kind of the overall mission, right, of decentralization. And he kind of got me into Bitcoin, and he also used to play around with Dogecoin, and he used to mine Bitcoin as well. So I guess my first experience was doing that, and we kind of used to have fun with Dogecoin. We used to gamble online with it. There's a whole bunch of gambling sites back then where you could gamble your Dogecoin all the way. But and it's funny because no one expected Dogecoin to go up. So if you actually look at it, he had millions of dollars that he was today that is gambling, right? But yeah, and then I've kind of ignored Bitcoin for a long time. And during the pandemic, 2020, I had a friend who started inviting me to some Bitcoin meetups. He's like, "Oh, you heard of Bitcoin?" I was like, "Yeah, I used to play around with it." And so I started going, and it's a BitDevs in South Florida. So I guess that's how I kind of was reintroduced to Bitcoin. After that, I got obsessed, and I started reading a lot about Bitcoin. I went back and I got the original code for Bitcoin and scanned it so I could really understand the foundation. And ever since then, I guess I've just been focused in on how Bitcoin works and different things about Bitcoin.
Nice. And then how did you decide then, Liquid is this side chain, you wanted to be building on that? What was so important about Liquid?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to scale Bitcoin, and Liquid is just one of the scaling solutions. I think there's a lot of things that makes Liquid very attractive, including the kind of scripting model. It's very similar to Bitcoin's in the fact that it's pretty much like a fork of Bitcoin. It shares a lot of the same code, and it's pretty secure in terms of how it's programmed, and I can actually jump into it from reading things in the Bitcoin code base and understand things very easily. So I really appreciated that. And there's a lot of other great features of Liquid. I don't know if you want me to get into it now or.
We can get into it. We've got a long list of topics to go through, but maybe first, if we're thinking about Liquid, I've heard people talk about it as a federated consensus model and as a side chain. So can you start with maybe a high level understanding of like what is a federated consensus model? How does that differ from Bitcoin's consensus model? And how does Liquid as a side chain plug into Bitcoin or connect to Bitcoin or interact with it?
Yeah. So I guess I could start with Bitcoin's model.
Sure.
So with Bitcoin, when you generate blocks, you have miners, and they collect transactions, they create a block, and then they compete, right? To try and kind of find this target hash, and they play around with the nonce and the extra nonces until one of them finds it, and then they can go and collect the block reward, the Coinbase transaction. And for kind of the Liquid sidechain, it's not a competitive thing. They decided to kind of have these Liquid members that are called block signers, and when you generate blocks, it kind of it's like a round robin type thing where members will take turns kind of signing, and you have or creating these blocks and take turns signing these blocks until they can kind of be finalized and added onto the Liquid blockchain. So it's not a competitive type thing. I'd say that's like the big difference between them. It is like it's not as open in certain ways, but it also isn't like completely centralized because you have all these different parties who have different interests, and you also have kind of this concept of dynamic federations where you can add and remove people from the selected list of like roles, what we call like watchmen and block signers. So, but yeah, in terms of block generation, I think that covers it.
Yeah. So the members in this federation can be added and removed. What is the incentive for all of them to participate correctly and to correctly process transactions?
Yeah, so block signers, I think there's always the intrinsic motivation to hold integrity of the chain, but there's also, fees that are collected to help process the on-chain transactions that eventually go back into Bitcoin. And a lot of, the block signers, it's good. I guess they have the control to go and collect these blocks and keep publishing them. They all kind of have a vested interest in Liquid. So I guess I'd say that.
Yeah. Now, let's get into some of the features of Liquid, because it's in some ways it's similar to Bitcoin, but in some ways it's different. A few differences: there's a 1-minute block time, native assets, confidential transactions. Can you talk more about like why it's important that Liquid has this set of features that is different from Bitcoin?
Yeah. So because you don't really have the same mining model, you get different affordances, and one of them is quicker block times. Or 1-minute block time is like great, and it's fast, and there has even been discussion of seeing if we could lower that even further, and it's kind of a nice functionality you have there. In terms of like the other features that make Liquid different is you can introduce things like confidential transactions, where I could go and transfer a certain amount of LBTC or any other asset, which we could also get into, and blind the amount and the asset type that I am sending to a recipient, which is very helpful in a lot of different scenarios.
Mm-hmm. And then you can also create native assets as well on Liquid?
Yeah, so assets on Liquid are like first-class citizens. You could go and make issuance transactions, and you could distribute your asset. There's also a concept of having reissuance tokens and creating more of tokens in the future if needed. And yeah, I think that's a very powerful idea that Liquid was built with assets in mind. It's kind of baked in to the design.
One other thing that I think I've heard you talk about it at a past conference was that Liquid is sort of a test bed for Bitcoin, or in some ways it's a testing grounds for new features. How does that work? How do liquid features migrate over to Bitcoin? Is there precedent for that?
Yeah, so it's I guess testbed might be a little misleading because sometimes when the word is like testbed is used, it's implied that the features aren't, I guess, fully like fleshed out. When a lot of the features that are added to Liquid, already have gone through years and years of research, and are definitely audited well. But yeah, so a lot of ideas can kind of go into Liquid first. So SegWit, is a famous example. We can kind of design it and then implement it in Liquid and show kind of the world that, hey, this model works, right? We have it working in some place, so we kind of have something proven here. In addition to that, I guess Liquid also has these other things that are going on within the chain that, could kind of evolve and move to Bitcoin at some point. So another thing is like simplicity is a big thing. It's an alternative scripting model to Bitcoin, or it could be, also in addition in terms of if it's ever integrated into the main chain. But it's a lot more powerful, and it's just a very interesting concept that I hope can get some progress. But yeah, it's Liquid is looks like it's gonna be its first home right now, and it is it's a really cool idea.
Yeah. So let's use maybe SegWit as an example. What was the process from that on Liquid to moving that to Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I know Liquid, or kind of elements on GitHub is what we call it. It shares a lot of like core maintainers to Bitcoin, and just like everything, there's always going to be a BIP that's introduced in Bitcoin. I'd say the adoption of ideas are still kind of go through the standard process for Bitcoin. It's just that now you kind of have like additional verification, I guess, in this other chain that you can say, hey, look at this. This is a working implementation. So it kind of adds backing. If you were to propose a BIP.
Right. Now, so is it fair to say that this is kind of like this experimentation ground for building things onto Bitcoin? Is this supposed to attract developers who want to, add new features to Bitcoin? Is that the idea here?
I'm like hesitant to say that it's like any kind of ideas could be added to elements, or it's necessarily supposed to attract people who want to add things to Bitcoin to Liquid. I would say Liquid is still very much its own thing, but because it's so similar to Bitcoin, when a new feature is introduced to Liquid, it definitely should, I guess, raise some excitement for the possibilities for Bitcoin.
I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
hopefully is that okay?
Yeah. So let's think about like Liquid as a scaling solution, and maybe we can do it in the context of Lightning. How do these two compare to each other? Because like both can process more transactions than you can on Bitcoin. What are the other similarities and differences, and do these two cross over at any point? Where do they overlap?
Yeah, so it doesn't really have to be one or the other. You could have Lightning channels in Liquid, because the scripting model in Liquid is very similar to that of Bitcoin. Liquid does add some additional opcodes, but all of the things that you could do on Bitcoin, you could pretty much do in Liquid. So you could open channels with people. HTLCs are also something you could do on Liquid, but so I don't know. It feels kind of weird to compare, but in terms of Liquid, I guess it also introduces the door for additional functionality, like having these things like opcodes and or additional opcodes and faster block times if we're comparing straight to Bitcoin. And I think those are huge benefits as a scaling solution, and to be able to kind of offload some of the transactions on Liquid, and to gain all those features that Liquid has, like confidential transactions, I think is a nice thing to have. But yeah,
Yeah.
in terms of scaling, I guess the quicker block time is kind of a huge thing.
Right. Is there another technology you might want to use instead to compare Liquid to, or is there maybe within the broader crypto ecosystem or in the traditional finance ecosystem, is there something that more closely resembles what Liquid is trying to do with Bitcoin?
Yeah, I would say at least kind of how me and some others I've spoken to have started thinking about Liquid is like a financial layer on Bitcoin. So a place that you could do a little bit more than what is natively supported on Bitcoin. So being able to have native assets on it, so you could issue stable coins like are in Liquid right now. In Tether, you could enable atomic swaps between them, and you have a very nice ecosystem to be able to build out these higher level financial products. But at the same time, you are still using Bitcoin, and that's kind of like the native asset that you have on Liquid. And I think that's very important. In terms of comparison, I don't know if there's anything exactly like Liquid that I can compare it to, but yeah, I would say it's a side chain. A lot of side chains have been posed as similar solutions to other blockchains.
Right. Now, when you talk about the financial layer on top of Bitcoin, this starts to sound a lot like the financial applications that we've seen explode in the rest of the crypto ecosystem, where you have stable coins, you have decentralized exchanges and things like that. Is it fair to say that those use cases can be ported over to Liquid and be built on Bitcoin?
Yeah, and 100%. There's native stablecoins that are being built on Liquid right now, like Fuji Money, and there's decentralized exchanges that are also being built out, like BitMatrix, which use the concept of liquidity pools and Liquid's advanced scripting features to enable things that Bitcoin previously couldn't. And a big change is having these web wallets, almost like MetaMask. There is something for Liquid called Marina, and that enables a lot more use cases than could have been anticipated on Bitcoin. So I would say that is a huge pivot towards the direction of actually having a lot more DeFi applications that run on this similar scripting model.
Yeah. So when you talk about advanced scripting models, is this something that is Liquid Turing complete? Am I thinking about that in the right way? That where you can do more, it has more flexibility, or no?
Not quite in that way, but there's, for example, you can kind of enable covenant-like, functionality, or you could. There are opcodes that allow you to inspect the output of your transaction, and I guess I've heard these called introspection opcodes, where you could, make assertions about certain outputs and what asset types they are, and so on and so forth. And with that, you can kind of make powerful applications. So I guess this is a tangent. In Bitcoin Plus Plus, we were working on this hackathon project where Barack from BitMatrix, he was able to make a script for like gambling, pretty much. Our application was dog racing, so you pick a certain number, and then my role is to help construct these transactions that use his locking script, and he would have a covenant that would allow 4 players to go and pick a number, and then the output of that would end up picking one winner and administering their winnings. So that's an example of a use case that's not really supported on Bitcoin, but is on Liquid because they have more opcodes to work with, which gives you more control. So it's not quite like something like Solidity, on Ethereum, but it definitely is more powerful than what Bitcoin can currently achieve.
Right. So it can handle a subset of the things that can be built on Solidity, but it encompasses a lot of the financial applications that one might want to build. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, I would say so.
Got it. So let's get into liquid assets and some of the financial applications here. What are the, are there any limitations to what kind of assets that can be built on Liquid?
Yeah, so you could pretty much issue anything, and then after you create an asset, what you typically want to do is register it. So Blockstream has their own asset registry, and you could register an asset that represents a new stablecoin that you'd like to make, or if you wanted to make some other model where you peg in assets from other blockchains, you could technically do that as well. So I guess what you can do in terms of assets isn't very limited, and there's a lot of different possibilities there.
What do you think? If you look at the asset landscape and think about all the different things you can build on Liquid, what do you think will be the first asset or the first use case that really finds product market fit on Liquid?
Yeah, so there's a lot of, I guess, financial assets that are being created today that you might have heard of before, right? Like the mining notes and the volcano bonds. People have been kind of talking about things like that. So those are definitely huge use cases that we'd see. There's, I would say, there's been other use cases which have been shown. There's a product that we have called AMP, and on our website we have a whole bunch of smaller use cases that have been taken on by developers, and depending on what kind of assets you're talking about, I guess it enables a lot. Something else that I could bring up is AMP, this product AMP that we have. So what we call a native asset on Liquid is the standard asset, but there's also things called issue retract assets and transfer restricted assets, and those are built on something called AMP, and they will restrict things about your asset. So, for example, you can create these things called like distributions, where you can administer assets specifically to our green wallets, which will enforce tighter control of these assets, so that they can only be transferred, between, let's say, green wallets. And they do this with this multi-signature scheme. So if you'd want to create a wallet in green, they could create a multi-signature, one that will look for authorization from Blockstream to transfer certain types of assets. So I don't know, you can kind of create these cool systems, which you can kind of close it a little bit more and add more restrictions for people who might want to use those use cases. And I would say that's pretty big.
Yeah. Can you also like time lock things, like, for example, stock vesting schedules and things like that?
Yeah, so anything, any script that you could write for Bitcoin or LBTC in Liquid's case, you could also make for an asset, which is very nice. I know the Bitcoin scripting model is very, it's like pushed a lot, and it's, at least amongst my circles, I've seen a lot of praise go towards, its predicate directed format. So I think it's very beneficial to the landscape to be able to transfer assets with the same type of script that is already used.
Yeah. Now, when you zoom out here and you think about the ways in which Liquid could impact the global financial landscape, where does your mind wander? Like, what impact do you think this could have if adopted globally?
Yeah, I think a lot of the money on Bitcoin, could be moved onto Liquid, and see use cases that range from options to all these crazy other type of financial instruments, and people could do that securely and confidentially between each other. You could have lightning channels that do atomic swaps between Bitcoin and Liquid, and we kind of can see that now through like bolts, and they have APIs that allow you to do things like submarine swaps and reverse submarine swaps, where you could even send Lightning Bitcoin and receive LBTC on the Liquid network. So I think that's really cool application as well. Going back to the hackathon project, what we did is we were able to send some Lightning Bitcoin to Bolt's API and receive some LBTC that was locked in the covenant, and the logic would kind of be all executed on Liquid, and then we could also make a payout back to Bolts to receive some Bitcoin Lightning as well. And I think that application can see a lot more use cases in the future.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that, like, I know this is pie in the sky ideas that I'm throwing out at you here, but when we think about like some of the big financial entities today, like maybe let's take an example, let's take the New York Stock Exchange. Can Liquid do all the functions of the New York Stock Exchange? Can it support all those trades and all the different like operations that this entity might have had to do otherwise, the New York Stock Exchange?
Yeah, I think there's room to be able to swap, different things, assets. If you have stable coins and you have, any arbitrary assets that you can create, you could definitely kind of create markets for things. And the way Script is right now, you could definitely, support use cases where you need exchanges, which is where any kind of arbitrary exchange you can kind of create and make. The 1 minute block times can support, a lot more than Bitcoin can. So I really think that that should be emphasized, and that things are kind of moving in that direction with things like BitMatrix. But in terms of functionality, I think there's still a lot more work that could be done and more applications that I'm excited to see in the future. But to answer your question, yes, I think something like an exchange, New York Stock Exchange, could be emulated in ways on Bitcoin and on Liquid, and using Lightning, you could even make cooler integrations where you could easily siphon off your Lightning Bitcoin into the Liquid network, and pretty much pipe them into your applications.
Now, what's the bear case for this? If I ask you now, like, what's the reason if we fast forward 10 years and Liquid is not, eating the New York Stock Exchange or some other like large exchange, what would the reason be? What do you think is the drawback of using something like Liquid?
Yeah, so I have heard some criticisms about pegging out. When you peg out, the kind of your Bitcoin has to go to a whitelisted address, and I guess that's what I've heard as one of the drawbacks. But
so can you describe that pegging mechanism? Anyone can peg in, but only whitelisted address can peg out? Is that correct?
Right? Yeah. So there is a set of whitelisted addresses that you can peg out to, and they're kind of also Liquid members. But you typically can synchronize with one of them, and I imagine they would administer your funds that way. But you also don't really have to do that. You could do atomic swaps, and you could do atomic swaps to get some Bitcoin or Liquid, one way or the other, or you could kind of do these submarine swaps or reverse submarine swaps and all that to try and get liquidity in either end of the spectrum. So I'd say that's a drawback that people typically bring up, but I'd say there's some workarounds on there.
And you could also do like a peer-to-peer exchange, right?
Right. Yeah. So, well, what do you mean by peer-to-peer exchange? Just
to get out of a Liquid asset into Bitcoin or something like that?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So any asset, technically you could go and do a swap between that and another peer. Yeah.
Right.
So what's the, I guess, does that cover the bear case, or would you?
Yeah, I think so. I want to get into Liquid usage in a bit, and like adoption and how that's going. But I want to stick to the asset discussion for now, and maybe we can go into the weeds on the different assets that are on Liquid today. I know there's a Blockstream mining note and volcano bonds you talked about. Can we go into the details of like exactly how these work and how they're different from a traditional bond offering for the volcano bond, for example?
Yeah, so I guess I can't really talk about the intricacies of like how those work policy-wise. All I can kind of say is that they're assets like our other Liquid assets, and I guess it changes by who's issuing it. Makes it important, but in terms of uh, any like details about them, I can't say too much about it.
Right. So the issuers of these assets are going to have to abide by their own policy restrictions in different regions and things like that, right? Like that.
Right.
Okay, got it. And so for, if I'm an issuer, is there any other advantage beyond maybe speed or efficiency in getting these bond offerings up on Liquid? Like, why else might I want to use Liquid over taking a traditional route?
Yeah, so again, we also have our AMP product, which integrates with Green, which gives you tighter controls over who can own your asset and who your asset can be transferred between. Because with Green, you kind of generate this Green ID, right? That's all ties into that multi-sig wallet and being able to transfer certain assets. You kind of have to get approval.
So when you're making a pitch to someone who wants to issue assets, is the big selling point then that you have tighter controls over the assets and you can like manage that process more seamlessly?
Yeah, I would
Is that
definitely
problem with
say,
it?
yeah, AMP brings a lot in the form of having tighter controls and um, being able to have a say in who owns your asset and control over like your initial distribution of where that can go, who that can be traded between. I think that's very powerful to have. You also have issuer tracked assets where you're kind of tracking the flow of how your assets go between different parties, and I think being able to, yeah, I think that restriction is very important to have and kind of sets a distinction for our liquid brand of products.
So what does an issuer tracked asset mean? That they can follow that chain along? If I pass it to you and you pass it to someone else, the issuer can see who holds it all the way along?
Yeah, you can kind of see the IDs and how this certain asset gets distributed amongst certain participants. So yeah, that's and
Is that
this is also.
something? Oh, go ahead.
I was also going to say AMP. They have a product page on Blockstream, and there's for people who are interested, you could also look and see the different types of assets, and they also have example use cases that you could go and look at. For anyone who's interested in making any. Yeah.
Now, is an issuer tracked asset similar to? I've heard this use case mentioned a few times, specifically with NFTs in mind, where an NFT issuer can put in a rule that if there's a resale, they take 10% of the, sale. Does that, and maybe that could apply for concert tickets or something like that, or some other like ticket-based asset. Is that something that can be done on Liquid, and do you think that will be a big use case?
Yeah, so I haven't really thought about I guess, a use case of like NFT royalties, but I'd have to look more into it. But I think something like that can be achieved in some way.
And that's something that you can do through this issuer tracked asset system.
Yeah, or even I mean I can imagine a certain use of covenants that requires transfer of an asset to always have an output that sends a certain amount to an address. So yeah, even just with the additional outcomes and the what you can make functionally with covenants, I think it accomplish something similar.
Interesting. Now, I have a question about the structure of Liquid as a blockchain. We have the other scaling solution, or the other big one is Lightning, and that's architecture is different from a blockchain. Why is a blockchain the right approach here for scaling Liquid? Why is that the decision made to create a blockchain versus this network that resembles like the Lightning network?
Yeah, so in terms of like the actual creation of it or the reasoning behind the designers, I can't speak so much, but I can give my opinion on why it's nice to have a blockchain in terms of being able to verify as a participant or someone who I guess just has a node in Liquid. You could kind of verify all of the transactions in that all of these block signers actually, went through every single block and signed it, and you can audit the chain yourself. And I think, that kind of don't trust, verify thing stands true, especially when you want a wide look on the blockchain and all the transactions between the different parties.
I see. Is there a scaling limit to Liquid? Like, is there a defined, like, here's how many transactions can be processed per second, or here's where the system can no longer scale? Like, what does that look like? What's the maximum kind of throughput on Liquid?
Yeah, so I don't know what the maximum is, but I do know that Liquid has more room to grow in terms of even the design. Like I was saying, even the kind of the block times of 1 minute are somewhat arbitrary and can maybe even be shrunk down a little bit, so the throughput could be made higher. Yeah, so I would say that there's even still room to improve. I can't tell you the actual hard numbers, but yeah, I can say that.
Right. And now let's discuss trust on Liquid. And I want to understand more about the differences in who you have to trust in this like federated consensus model versus Bitcoin. Can you break those down for me and like explain the difference of like, and maybe even in relation to issuing an asset? Like, if I'm a user on Liquid, who am I trusting in this process?
Yeah, so in a way, you do kind of put trust in the block signers. That they will sign your block. There's a certain threshold, of block signers that need to be able to act in honest faith and put these signatures on the blocks. So I'd say that's the trust model. You do kind of have to put a certain amount of trust in the federation that has been created, thus far. Whereas Bitcoin, your only trust is put towards the fact that if you had, let's say, I don't know, a malicious 51% of miners, it would be very expensive to perform attacks, especially to try and rewrite significant portions of the chain. So yeah, I would say there's a big difference in kind of the trust assumptions for each chain.
Mm-hmm. And then in respect to the token, if I've created a stable coin and and you buy some from me, are you trusting then that I don't create more? Is that another trust issue?
Yeah, so in terms of trusting trusting an issuer to administer assets, one part of trust is being able to look at the Blockstream registry, and looking up an asset name and that we verified whatever domain is tied to that asset. So there's a trust assumption there. And also this registry, Blockstream has one, but technically anyone could make their own commitment scheme for the blockchain and make their own registry. But most people are gonna kind of start using the Blockstream registry. So I just kind of bring that up as this trust assumption. In terms of reissuance, you can view certain things about your transaction. So yeah, you could keep unblinded issuances and say, hey, I want to show the world this is how many tokens that I've administered, and I'm going to set a 0 reissuance tokens. So there's a way to kind of prove to people like, hey, I'm not going to be reissuing more assets. So you don't necessarily have to put any trust in an issue in that way. You could just check or verify if you have your elements node in the blockchain.
I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Voltage. Voltage is the industry standard for Lightning Network infrastructure. Creating layer 2 applications and services on top of Bitcoin starts with Voltage, where you can spin up nodes, get access to liquidity, optimize your node, and much more. Voltage is leading the way as the next generation provider of Lightning Network infrastructure. And if you want to get a free trial and start using Voltage today, you can do so at voltage.cloud. Okay, let's get into usage on Liquid today. So I've been digging around and I looked through the mempool Explorer, and I'm watching Liquid blocks come in. Right now they're more or less empty. There's often like 1 to 5 transactions per block today. Where do you think we are in this in the grand scheme of like liquid adoption, and how do we get to the point where there are full blocks on liquid? What needs to happen?
Yeah, so I think development of applications is still early on liquid, and there's a lot of room to create a whole bunch of use cases. And one thing that I've heard from people is that because liquid has this extended script, you can create things like liquidity pools and decentralized exchanges. And sometimes kind of what people in crypto want to do is have fun, right, with the blockchain. And one of those things is being able to have, I don't know, something where you can gamble with all these, random tokens that people create or assets. And I think that will, help drive adoption. But also the more serious cases where people want to have assets that they have, a lot of tight controls over, and they still want it to be, auditable with the blockchain. I think that's very important. So I think we'll continue to see more serious financial instruments maybe being placed on liquid, and confidential transactions. I don't speak enough justice to it, but it is a very cool application where I could send an arbitrary amount of something and keep that hidden from the network, what kind of asset it is and what amount it is. So I do see, I don't know, if I'm an institution, I want to move a large amount of money, that's pretty important to me. But another thing that's important is I could share what you call a blinding key with somebody, and they can audit me as well. And so it is still auditable, but only to selected parties. And even then, the whole everyone who has a copy of the blockchain with their elements node can go and verify that the integrity of the amounts, that nothing's being created or destroyed cryptographically. So yeah, I find that really interesting.
Yeah. How does the privacy on Liquid compare to other blockchains and other things we've seen? Like we have Zcash and we have Monero, and there's a few others. Like, is it fair to make a one-to-one comparison here, or are these different systems?
I haven't looked too deeply at the other blockchains, but from what I've heard, it's very similar in how you can kind of hide the amounts or these confidential transactions cryptographically. I think they're very similar.
And now, do you think this poses an issue for regulators? Like in a world where there's a lot of assets on Liquid and there's a lot of money moving back and forth, and this isn't like Lightning where it's microtransactions. This may be like big issuances of volcano bonds or something. Is that an issue do you think, for regulators around the world, where all of a sudden they recognize that there are maybe billions or trillions of dollars flowing through a system, but they can't see any of it, or they don't know who it's moving to and from?
Yeah, so it could be a problem, for regulators in certain areas. But if I'm an institution and I do kind of am obligated to follow whatever laws are in my area, I do always have the, I guess, possibility of giving a regulator my blinding key and auditing me. Or on the same hand, I could also make unblinded transactions. So I guess this is from the point of view where I am an honest party who would like to follow regulations in my area. That is possible to do. Of course, I think being able to make confidential transactions on an individual basis is always very important. So regulators or anybody else doesn't need to snoop around there. But yeah, if you do want to be a party who abides by certain things, you always have the option to allow people to audit what you're doing.
I see. Now, I know we're getting back to the discussion about like different exchanges. I want to, one thing I want to understand is like how important in the financialization of Liquid, how important is it that you guys can build a network effect on Liquid? Because we've seen these network effects that have really taken off in the DeFi ecosystem. Obviously, like the main stock exchanges in the traditional financial space, that's a network effect in and of itself. How do you think about bootstrapping a network effect around Liquid?
I'm hoping for these network effects to happen. I think they can take place with the addition of all these applications. I think that's kind of what a lot of us are banking on, that people will start seeing the value of the sidechain and rushing, to go and kind of peg in your money and start making your confidential transactions, or start making swaps between your LBTC and assets and inviting other people in it. So you could also create things like NFTs as well. And I know that people have started doing it. Rare Toshi, I hear, and then just the more integration that you have, and the more the user base expands, I do think there is a network effect that can be capitalized on that.
Right. Now, is this going to be an uphill battle of trying to disrupt or trying to take market share from things like Uniswap or the NASDAQ or some bond market? Or do you think the primary network effect is going to be built around serving people who don't have an alternative today, who don't, like maybe Volcano Bonds is a good example where maybe, is it true that there's going to be some use cases where there's just no venue to support this kind of activity today? Or are you going to be disrupting kind of existing business models, do you think?
I think maybe a little bit of both. For some use cases, maybe there isn't quite the ability to implement whatever idea that you want to do. Again, sorry to go back to these kind of main big differences, and so I keep referencing these features, but maybe I have an idea where I would like to have a whole bunch of assets and distribute them to different people for some scheme, and I want that to be kept hidden, but transparent to regulators. So I can give blinding keys to the people who need it, but also keep the public at large, clueless to what I'm doing. That could be kind of a scheme that I could enable with Liquid. And again, having LBTC is very important for some, as being the native asset and being kind of pushed as the underlying currency that pushes everything up. So, but you also get the traditional use cases, again, the liquidity pool that people want to see, the Uniswap type use cases. And I think being able to build things that we've seen before, but also things that aren't as common or haven't been thought of because the functionality set of Liquid hasn't been made largely known, is important and can happen. So I think, both things are possible, being able to traditional applications and also building new things that maybe weren't as possible to do before, or not as easy. And we're definitely trying to make the developer experience as easy as possible on Liquid to attract more developers and make it a chain that people would want to use.
Right. What's been the biggest challenge so far in attracting developers to build on Liquid?
Yeah, so I would say just a lot of Bitcoin developers that I've spoken to want to know more, but they just they haven't had an opportunity to learn. So I definitely think getting the word out and going to more of these type of Bitcoin events and talking more about the possibilities that are enabled with Liquid are going to be very important for being able to spread the word about Liquid and attracting more developers and building tools that could help people try to experiment with Liquid in ways that are low friction or not too difficult to on-ramp if you worked with Bitcoin. So I'd say those things.
Mm-hmm. It seems like in the last year, the Lightning ecosystem has really taken off and has gotten a flood of developers in from off of the initial adoption there. Are there any lessons that you're taking away from the last year of Lightning adoption and trying to apply to Liquid to catalyze or bootstrap another wave of adoption?
Yeah, so because Liquid works on Lightning, I think that is also a huge draw to come and build on Liquid as well. You could start building covenants that integrate with Lightning, and you kind of are able, at least in terms of the Lightning portion of a project that you'd like to build, you pretty much have that covered, right? Because Lightning, the protocol kind of stays the same in a lot of ways. So maybe one of the learnings is trying to capitalize on whatever learnings Lightning has made by saying, hey, come bring it to Liquid, because you could have the same things, and except with assets and a little bit more additional functionality.
Right. And now I have to ask, with the discussion about assets and Lightning, Taro, how do these two ideas, relate to each other right now? Taro with Lightning Labs, and Liquid plus Lightning, like Liquid assets on Lightning. What are the similarities and differences there?
Yeah, so Taro is a little bit different in that, it's something that's kind of enabled with the recent Taproot functionality. Right now, you could start making commitments in transactions that are part of this Merkle tree, right? A Merkle commitment that you end up putting in your transaction that doesn't take up any more space than needed. It doesn't, I guess, waste a Bitcoin transaction, and that's very useful and a powerful idea in terms of trying to create this new system where you can have assets. But on Liquid, it is in certain ways simplified because we have first-class assets and it's natively supported. I know Taro, at least from what I understand, I could be incorrect about some things, but it seems kind of like this overlay network with commitments on Bitcoin, which is a little bit more complex, or can be seen by some. And I would say simplicity that Liquid brings might be attractive to some people who'd want to start dipping their toes in a way that's not as involved, because we have very easy ways to issue these assets.
Are there any differences in the types of assets that can be supported on the two, between Taro and Liquid?
From what I understand, no. You could, well, from our previous discussion about AMP, because we've kind of made a product out of the original base asset offering that you could use on Liquid, I would say right now, yes, but I don't know what's in store for the future of Taro, and they could implement a whole bunch of cool things as well. So yeah, I'd say right now we have something that works and that you could use today, and that has a whole bunch of functionality. But Taro does look promising, so I don't know what directions they're going to go in.
That's fair. I want to ask about the pegged-in capacity on Liquid right now. I believe it's around 3,500 Bitcoin. Is that correct?
I think so.
Okay, somewhere around there. So how do we think about this number? Is it comparable to the number, the public capacity on Lightning? Is it comparable to, total value locked metrics in DeFi? Because I know those two are not comparable to each other. The Lightning metrics of public capacity and TVL don't quite line up perfectly. It's not quite an apples to apples comparison. How do you think about comparing this number of pegged-in capacity to other metrics in the crypto ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think there are some interesting things about Liquid in that you could create a peg-in on Bitcoin, but also not claim your LBTC on Liquid. You kind of have to make kind of the members aware of your peg-in transaction. So in some ways there could be like more, I'm just saying there's like some variability in what is tracked and what has been put into Bitcoin, in LBTC, So
the number could be higher than the 3,500?
Yeah, in ways it could be higher, because you have to let kind of the network know that, hey, I made this Bitcoin transaction, go and send this to my address. And technically, not everyone might do that. I could make a peg-in transaction and never claim my LBTC until later. So there is some variance there. But I think something like total value locked is maybe comparable, right? I've heard someone say that it's almost like you have this multi-sig wallet that contains this whole universe of the Liquid sidechain on Bitcoin, and that would be a way to kind of view it in these multi-sig wallets. It's like these gateways, right, to the sidechain. So yeah, ASDVL might be a good comparison.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I know happened in the last couple of years is a lot of Bitcoin started moving to other chains as this like wrapped Bitcoin or this form of Bitcoin, right? And I believe, I don't know the exact number now, but I think at one point there was about 250,000 Bitcoin expressed as wrapped Bitcoin on things like Ethereum. What do you think that we're going to see a similar migration of Bitcoin onto Liquid as the ecosystem matures?
Yeah, I mean, I think there will definitely be a steady increase in Bitcoin into Liquid as things progress, as we create more offerings that people want to go invest their money in, or applications that people want to go and play around with. So I do expect an increase in the wrapping concept. Is very similar in how Liquid does it. Of course, there's a kind of a lot of sophisticated algorithms that go into the peg-ins and peg-outs and regulating all of that, even down to the hardware modules that are used to maintain things in the network. But they have the similarities in being like a wrapped type of Bitcoin. Liquid Bitcoin can be seen in a similar fashion.
Right.
But yeah, but I do see growth in Liquid's future.
Now, when you think about the total Bitcoin addressable market of 21 million, or maybe you want to exclude a couple million lost coins, what is the breakdown over time? What do you think the breakdown will be of people that just want their Bitcoin, on the base blockchain, and those who want to experiment, those who want to move it on to Liquid or onto Lightning or as a wrap token on some other chain? Like, how do you think about that, the split between like where Bitcoin is going to be deployed over time?
Yeah, so I think it'll vary a lot. Maybe in some future, you might have multiple, offshoots, side chains, and where you can kind of peg into one, and then peg out, bring it to another side chain with another set of trade-offs, and bring it back to Bitcoin. And let's say after you're done playing around with your money, you want to leave it in cold storage in your Bitcoin wallet, which you could also do. And I think we can kind of create an ecosystem surrounding Bitcoin where you could take your money to a different chain with different security assumptions and bring it back to the base chain after you're done playing around with it pretty much. I think that's a nice idea. Also, I didn't bring this up back when talking about Lightning versus Liquid, but with Liquid you could hold your funds in a cold wallet, as opposed to Lightning you need like these hot wallets. So I just thought of it because I was thinking of Bitcoin, loading things in your cold wallet there. But
Right.
yeah, I do see a world where you can move around your money and things vary, and you will see activity, between both, whether they're atomic swaps or pegging out, your Bitcoin. But I do see lots of activity going back and forth. I think would be a nice, healthy way to indicate growth.
Yeah. So in general, like you think Bitcoiners and Bitcoin they hold is going to be moved around faster as time goes on and used for more interesting use cases beyond just storing it?
Yeah. So whether you put on Lightning and you want to make a whole bunch of payments and then you want to close your channel, or maybe not close your channel and do a reverse submarine swap into Liquid, you can do that too. I think enabling all these different types of use cases of being able to move your funds around is very important to the community and important to the growth of Bitcoin, because people, unfortunately, everyone's kind of straying to all these other chains, but I think people are again kind of starting to realize the value of Bitcoin and coming back to this base currency and seeing that there are options that you could do on Bitcoin where you could lift your funds and do different things with them. So I just want to see if we can kind of grab some of the audience back to focusing on Bitcoin, base chains, and fostering growth there, and seeing that you could do all the things that you want to do on other chains right here.
Yeah. I wonder if these two ideas are at odds with each other. I just started thinking about this. Like, if Bitcoiners think like, I'm going to hold on to this thing because I see how messed up the traditional financial system is. I see all the problems. I think this is the solution, and I think this has a lot of room to run as an asset. I could see how Bitcoiners may say, I'm just going to hold this. I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to do anything with it. Forget all the other applications in the crypto space until this thing goes to $1 million or more, it's kind of just like just sitting on it. And then maybe at that point, people begin to, maybe this isn't an off-on switch, maybe this is a progression over time, but maybe as the value goes up, do you think it's more likely that people begin to start doing things with it as that, the promise of Bitcoin as a store of value becomes fulfilled?
Yeah, I think with the higher value of Bitcoin, people will definitely try and or have more leeway to take risks. If I have $1,000 today and it becomes 50,000 at some point, it's like I'm a lot more willing to take, I don't know, the original amount and go and siphon that into these experiments. So I definitely think having a higher price tag on the existing Bitcoin will encourage people to start taking smaller amounts of their Bitcoin and trying to invest with it. Like you said, kind of naturally, that was kind of bound to happen. You'll get these increasing prices.
Right. Okay, I want to close off with some of the interesting projects that you're seeing right now on Liquid. I think we talked about a couple off camera, but can we go through, like, if you have a few important ones you want to highlight, or people that are building on Liquid or considering building on Liquid? Do you want to run through some of those projects right now?
Yeah. Again, I've already kind of mentioned them. So sorry, it sounds repetitive to some, but I'm a big fan of Marina, the web wallet. I think that enables a lot of different use cases through the web, and that's still being like developed. So there's updates all the time that allow you to do more and more with it. There's the stablecoin, it's going to be here pretty soon, Fuji, and that's going to be on Liquid, which will allow you to do cool things, with things like the liquidity pool, BitMatrix, right? Putting money in there. I see products like TDEX. There's like PeerSwap and all these different things you could do on Liquid. So I still think that the space has a lot of room to grow, and I do want to encourage as many Bitcoin devs to come and at least play around with Liquid and see what's to offer there. So yeah, I think there's a lot of more room to experiment, and even with all these great applications, I think we have room for a lot more.
Awesome. Now I want to get into a segment that I do at the end of every show called the lightning round, and it's an opportunity for listeners to send in questions, and also me to ask some more rapid fire questions. I've got a few questions for you. Are you ready for the lightning round?
Yeah, sounds good.
Welcome to the lightning round presented by Zebedee, your portal into the world of Bitcoin gaming. The Zebedee app offers a full-featured Lightning wallet seamlessly integrated with your own personal gamer tag so that you can earn Bitcoin on all of Zebedee's games on mobile and desktop. It's never been more fun to earn Bitcoin, and Zebedee is your key to it all. To claim your personal gamer tag and start earning some Bitcoin of your own, download the Zebedee app today. All right, first one. Are there any books that have meaningfully changed your view of the world?
Here, let's see. I've read a lot of books, so I'm trying to think of if there's any that's changed mine in particular. There's some books kind of early in life that I thought were interesting. I don't know if you ever heard of like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I thought that was a pretty interesting book. There was also one, I don't know, it just had a lot of interesting ideas, which is, I like to learn about the history of a lot of different companies. So I know there's a book about like Pixar's founding. There's also one about Amazon. I can't think of their names right now because it's been a while since I read these, but yeah, I'd say those stick out in my mind. Yeah, and I love autobiographies, so I've read a couple of those. So
Nice.
Yeah.
Next question. What is the most underrated Bitcoin project in the entire industry? Putting you on the spot with this one.
Yeah.
Or what is the most interesting one to you that you wish more people would recognize, I guess?
Yeah, I like the U3XO project, which is basically it's has something to do with reducing, the size that you have to hold on like a Bitcoin node or a type of Bitcoin node. This isn't. It's not. I think it needs like a bridge node or something to be able to relay certain information to these kind of new model of nodes that hold like Merkleized UTXOs. But yeah, in general, I like projects that make Bitcoin accessible to more people. So whether that's being able to reduce the amount of space that you hold on your hard drive, to hold information about the Bitcoin blockchain, or finding easier ways to mine, or making it more participatory and decentralized, anything along those lines, I think are really cool.
Nice. If you could change one thing about Bitcoin, what would you change?
That's it's hard to say. I would say that maybe, and it's kind of a controversial topic that I've seen between individuals, but covenants. I do like the idea of covenants. So being able to introduce covenants to Bitcoin, I think would be something I would try and change.
Interesting. Okay, final question. How many Bitcoin will be pegged into Liquid in the year 2030?
That's that's a long time in the future. Yeah, I can't even pretend to answer that. I mean, I hope a good percentage. That's all I could say.
Fair enough. All right, thank you for taking the time. I learned a lot. This is kind of my first introduction to Liquid. I'm glad we could do this discussion and really dive into the weeds on how it works. I'm sure listeners will get a ton out of this episode. Where can everyone go to learn more about you and the work you're doing?
Yeah, so if you're not following the Blockstream Twitter accounts, go and head and follow those, because we'll be publishing news of any new products that we release. There's also a Liquid subreddit. I can't remember the exact /r path, but I'll see if I could get it and start having it posted on the Blockstream Twitters. I'd say those are good places to kind of learn what we're doing, and on Liquid applications, which is the team I work on building on Liquid. So yeah, just keep an eye out on those channels.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the time, and hope we can do it again soon.
Yep, thanks.
In the last 7 days, you guys sent in 45,916 sats. That came in from 61 different supporters. Again, the numbers are getting kind of crazy. We have dozens of supporters sending in comments and sats every single week. Thank you to everyone. Let's run through the top 5 supporters of the last 7 days. First, we have an anonymous user at Breeze who sent in 15,574. GS Sovereign sent in 8,010 sats. Mitch Lancaster sent in 4,900. RGBTC sent in 2,450. And Merlin sent in 2,448. Now let's get into the boosts of the last week. We had a number of boosts. We start off with Bon, who says, incredible episode, Gigi is the best, in response to episode 56 with Gigi on internet business models and value for value. That's one of the most popular shows I've done to date. Check it out if you haven't already. Mitch Lancaster sent in 4,900 sats and says, great interview and great book recommendations. Thank you, in response to Alan Plus on episode 58. Also a great interview, and Alan is going to be doing a Stacker News AMA tomorrow, I believe. I just saw that on Twitter. Othala says, enjoyed the interview with Paolo and Matthias. Very promising technology, in response to episode 59 with Paolo Arduino and Matthias Boost. Tony Fontana says, interesting topic, worth a re-listen, in response to the same episode. I mean, this technology, this peer-to-peer technology is just, it challenges a bunch of assumptions about how apps are supposed to work. Especially if you've been using apps on your phone for the last decade and you're used to being locked into Google or Apple or whatever ecosystem you're in. It's a breath of fresh air, and it's a challenge to shift your mindset and to think about apps differently. So I really enjoyed that conversation. GS Sovereign says, thank you, Paolo and Matthias. You are continuing Satoshi's work, and sent in 8,000 sats. Thank you, GS Sovereign. Permaculture sent in 320 sats, says, this type of forward thinking in regards to private data streaming over an open protocol really gets the imagination going. Robots making transactions amongst themselves sounds like a very useful technology. Better search engines are needed. I can't find anything on YouTube anymore. And Permaculture sent in 320 sats. Again, these are all in response to episode 59. Check that one out if you have not seen it already. Denton sent in 1,039 sats and said, very interesting episode. Thanks. Episode 58 with Alan Plus. ITALIVAR says, I'm extremely excited for Hole Punch. It makes so much sense when they talk about it. A true revolution. I'm very excited as well. Thank you for the sats and the comment. Bond says, do you dox your IP to the other people you're connecting to? This is a huge turnoff if so. I didn't hear that asked or answered on episode 59. Bond, I'm going to reach out to Paolo and I'm going to send him your question. When I hear back, I will let you know on the following episode what his response is. Brian of London says, I'm building on Lightning and Hive, and you said you wanted to hear from people who are a little more skeptical on Lightning. I'm a huge believer in protocols above platforms, which is why the pod ping system I invented is a new protocol. I don't ever ask to go on shows, but I think there's a lot to say about what true Web3 will be without VCs and corporations, and it would be good for Lightning people to hear it. And I'm interested, Brian. Thank you for sending in also the 2,473 sats. Brian has been a constant contributor to the show. He's been sending in a bunch of comments. I'm interested in learning more. Again, I'm pretty skeptical about what Hive is. I've made that clear on the show, but I'm interested. I think I have Brian on Twitter, so we'll continue that conversation there. Thank you to everyone for sending in sats, comments, and questions. This is my favorite part of the show, and every episode it seems like it gets longer and longer, and I'm just impressed that people continue to send in sats and comments, and that there's this level of engagement. The episode listens tend to continue going to new highs every single week. So it's awesome to see that there's genuine interest in Lightning, people building on Bitcoin, and I can't wait to see what you guys send in this next episode.